Hey all, so in today's video, I'm going to be extending on one of Heartbeat's tutorials that he created on his site on how to use composition to organize your Godot games. And so the way I'm going to be doing that is in the first tutorial, Heartbeat showed you how to create a composition-based player for the world that had separate components for the movement stats, the actual velocity input, so handling input from the user, and then actually executing the movement. And so I want to take that one step further and implement an enemy AI using the same sort of composition setup that Heartbeat showed in his tutorial. So let me give you a quick look on what this kind of system does with the added enemy AI features, and then we can go from there. Cool, so in the loaded game, let me make this a bit bigger, you can see that we have the player is a little blue guy that I'm moving around, and then we have an enemy that has some sort of logic that it follows. When there's a player within its little bubble, it'll start following it. I could fine tune those metrics a little bit more, but you can see that enemy logic is there, although not tuned and pretty shitty. So with that being said, let's go ahead and dive in on how I went ahead and implemented this enemy AI logic. Cool. So in Heartbeat's tutorial, he goes over how to create this initial top-down movement scene, this top-down movement velocity input scene, and then also the top-down movement stats, right? And he also has the Godot scripts or the GD scripts for each of these. And from this top-down movement stats, you actually want to create a resource. That's the first thing I did. There was a player movement resource at the end of Heartbeat's tutorial, but what I went ahead and did is I just created an additional resource with a max speed, acceleration, and friction that was different for the enemy than it is for the player. Now to do that, all you need to do is you come right click here, new resource, and then you just create it from the resource. In this case, I wanted the top-down movement stats. So I created that, and then you can name it whatever you want. I named mine enemy, and then you just update the stats. And we're going to be using these a little bit later, just as Heartbeat showed in his tutorial. And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go into scenes. And I created this enemy a little bit later, but what I want to do is top-down movement's going to stay the same. The only other thing we need to change is instead of doing a velocity input, I do top-down movement velocity AI, which I just realized I did not spell. I should have added movement in here to keep that kind of structure the same, but whatever. And so what we do here is we have that top-down movement velocity AI, and it needs a few things where the other ones, like for input, we didn't need any additional nodes. For this one, I actually needed to make it a node 2D instead of a node. And then I have an area and a collision shape underneath that. The reason I did it as a node 2D is because we're actually going to be having to do some calculations around this node, or the enemy containing node, and then there's the collision shape contained within this velocity AI, because I believe it should be a part of that component. If you guys disagree, feel free to debate below. This is a lot of my opinion on how this should be implemented based on what I know and what I've seen as far as creating these kind of composition-based nodes. So that's how I decided to do it. And with that, there is a signal from the area 2D for on-body entered and on-body exited. And once you have this set up, we can go ahead and open the script. And that script I just called top-down velocity AI GD, so same name as the scene, just with a GD script. So let me shrink this a little bit. And you can see there's quite a bit more logic than there was in the actual input, because all we were doing for the input was taking the actual input from, or getting the vector using UI left, UI right, UI up, and UI down, and that's how we have the player movement from the blue guy. But from the red guy, I need to do a little bit more. And so the first thing we do is the class name is top-down velocity AI, extends node 2D, export 4 variables actually. So let me make these a little bit closer. There is the actor itself, right, which is similar to the input, right? So as the actor that is going to be enacting that movement upon, or adding the velocity to, I guess, because the movement is what handles the actual movement of the actor. There is the search radius, or top-down movement stats, right, which is why I created that additional enemy, top-down movement stats. There is the search radius scale, which literally just takes this collision shape, and then it resizes it using these transform scale. Found that to be the easiest way to do it without having to go into this, and allows you to change the scale for each kind of enemy that you attach this node to, right? If we want to have it be different, I want to have you be able to do it within the editor, the inspector, instead of having to go into the code and change it. So that's how that works. Now let's head back to the script. And then we got players, which is the target group. I also went ahead and added for the player scene, added them to a group, just in case I ever have multiple players, which is something I like to do, is make multiplayer games. Just who likes to play alone? I don't know, probably some people. But anyway, I added the player to a group called players. And now we can always change what this enemy AI is going to chase, right? It makes it a little bit more reusable. And then there is the target body, which is not exported because that's just used within the internal logic. And now when the character's loaded, what it's going to do is we're actually going to set the scale of the collision shape to the size of the search radius scale that we set, right? That way it's done in the inspector, just like I showed previously. Then we have a few things, right? I want to start with the on area body 2D entered and exited, just so you can see what's going on here. And so when a body is entered into the area that we have defined, right within this top-down velocity AI, whenever somebody enters this area, right, and they're of the group players, then the target body is going to be set to body. And what this means is only the first character to enter will be targeted, which is fine. You could do like an aggro system or whatever, but this is just the simplest way to do it, right? First one in is the one that the enemy targets. It should be simple enough for like a slime enemy or something like that. As you get into more advanced enemies, obviously you want to add aggro, all that sort of stuff. And then print, right? All it does is, so I can debug and see that the character's actually in there. And when the character leaves, it removes it, which allows another character to be in there. So if there's a second character within the body, then it'll start targeting that other character. And so with that, once that happens, in the physics process itself, if there's not a target body, right, the character or the enemy is going to be slowed down to 0. And if there is a target body, we're going to get the direction 2 from the global position of this, whatever node this is in, right, a part of, to the actual target body, right? So we get that position there. And then the same logic that was in the player, right, for the input, or calculations, we're going to move toward, but instead of input, we're going to do direction, right? So max speed, it's still using all the same stats, delta, etc. You can see the only thing I changed here is the actual direction. And now we have an enemy AI that can be reused over and over and over again. And so that's how I created this little demo, where we not only have the player that is using composition, but we also have an enemy. And we didn't really have to make that many changes, so I thought that was pretty cool. Anyway, I guess one last thing I want to go over is no changes were made to the top-down movement GD, right? The only thing that was changed was we have a different, and we could have still used the player movement stats. We didn't have to create a new movement stats. I just wanted the enemy movement stats to be different than the player movement stats. So really the only change that was made is in this little calculation of movement, right? Setting the velocity itself. And then the top-down movement still handles this the same way it did for a player. So I thought that was pretty cool. Thanks to Heartbeast for actually creating that initial tutorial, because it really helped to click in my mind. If you guys want to check out his stuff before you dive into this, I will link to his blog post below. Other than that, keep on making games and have a good one.